It's 74 degrees in beautiful downtown Murfreesboro, and we're coming to you from the studios of WGNS Radio, 1450 on your dial. Oh, hello, thank you for joining us. It's time for Murfreesboro Storytellers. This month's program features local radio. Our guests are Bart Walker, owner of WGNS Radio, and Ralph Vaughn, a veteran radio man from Warren and DeKalb counties. Stay tuned. Welcome to Murfreesboro Storytellers. This month we're emanating from the downtown studios of WGNS Radio in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And we have a couple of other radio guys with us to talk about radio here in this community and radio generally. Bart Walker, owner of WGNS Radio.
Good to be here, John.
Good to have you, Bart. And Ralph Vaughn, late of DeKalb County Radio, as well as other environs along the line. Yeah. Ralph, good to have you.
Thank you, John. I'm honored that you asked me to be on the program.
Well, our pleasure. We thought it'd be fun to talk about radio, three old radio guys, if you will, and how it's been a part of our lives and hopefully a part of the communities that we're involved in. I think it has been. I think about January 1st, 1947. Bart, why is that date significant?
That date is when this radio station came on the air. In fact, it came on the air at 10:45 in the evening the night before, so we could ring in the new year. And so the new year, 1947, started with a new radio station, the first one in Rutherford County, known as the Good Neighbor Station, which is what Cecil Elrod came up with.
And Cecil Elrod was the original owner. As a matter of fact, I always understood the story was he tried to get different call letters. This at that time was known as the Dairy Center of the South. So he asked for WCOW. And thankfully, it was not accepted, and it became WGNS Radio. How about your early days in radio, Ralph? Where did that emanate? At your home?
Well, it did. In fact, I was 6 years old, John, and I wanted to be a radio broadcaster. I was so bashful, though, I didn't tell anybody. But my mother...
Ralph Vaughn, bashful?
Not the one we know.
My mother had a dresser in her bedroom, and it was my pretend radio station. She had a large hairbrush, and that was my pretend microphone. And I would listen to WSM in Nashville every day, and I would pretend that I was sounding like those guys on WSM. And I did that for 11 years, every day for 11 years. And then in 1965, I auditioned at WJLE in Smithville. I read the weather forecast and introduced a few records. The station manager said, "You're pretty good." And I thought, well, I should be. I've been practicing for 11 years.
And how many years did you work for WJLE?
A total of 17.
17 years.
And then I was in McMinnville, and then here at WGNS.
Bart, we got the radio station on the air, but we didn't talk about Bart Walker. When and how did you get in radio?
It sounds like we got into it similarly. I got interested in radio the Christmas, I guess, of my I was 7 years old, got a tape recorder, and instead of using it like most people, I did radio shows on it. Later on, built a little radio station that went around the neighborhood, and from then just hung around radio and couldn't get it out of my blood, and obviously it stuck because I'm still here.
And how long have you owned WGNS?
Wow, 30-something years now. Time flies when you're having fun.
Absolutely. And in my early recollection, I had a vacant lot next to our home on North Church Street where we had a lot of ball games. So my folks bought me a PA amplifier and speakers and a microphone, and I used to do play-by-play in that field out there and have a lot of fun doing it, and eventually it led to a job at WGNS in 1948.
I'm wondering, John, I wonder if the young people of today have the passion that you had, Bart had, and I had. I wonder.
About some things, but I'm not sure. Yeah. It's difficult to know. Whole different environment we live in these days.
Although I think once they get into broadcasting, it gets it becomes a passion.
It's very infectious, I think. It really gets to you, and it's something you enjoy doing night and day, I'd say.
Yeah, and it's like a fraternity, I think, whether you've been in small-town radio, as I was, and medium-sized radio like Bart is and like you were. We have an affinity. There's a camaraderie that's hard to explain, but it's like a fraternity, I think.
There really is.
Yeah.
Well, when I was in radio, it was small-town radio back in the early days of WGNS. Bart, what have been some of the exciting things that have happened to you in radio particularly here at WGNS? Memorable events.
Well, I think the most memorable thing was one morning when we were listening to this station and suddenly it went off the air. And we called the station, it was a Sunday morning, and asked the guy, and it was, this always happens when there's somebody brand new. And I said, is the electricity off or what's happened? He said, no, electricity's on. And I said, well, check and see if the light on the tower is on. That way I'd know if the transmitter was getting electricity. And he said, came back, yeah, it's blinking white. And I said, no, our tower blinks red. No, it's blinking white. And I said, this is the one right behind McDonald's. Well, I don't see it. And I knew then that was not a good sign, so we started in, and about the time we got to Jackson Heights, which you usually could see it well, it was not there. So that was probably the most memorable time. The nightmare of a broadcaster is to have the tower fall.
Bad weather take it down?
We had
a storm?
We had a tornado at that time, and that's what I thought took it down. The Weather Bureau comes out the next day and analyzes what's wrong, and they said it was a downdraft storm with winds, the inverted winds sort of clipped it.
As I recall, that tower was 330 feet tall.
You're
327 feet with a 3-foot light on the top.
And it still is.
And was self-supporting.
And it still
Yeah,
is.
still the same height the replacement is.
We came back with the exact height, and thanks to the city of Murfreesboro. I mean, they were phenomenal.
Wonderful.
They helped us through that very trying time, and we really had to go through a lot of hoops to get everything approved. But the city walked us through it, and they were just true friends. They were real good neighbors.
How long before you got back on the air?
We were back on the air the next day with a temporary antenna, but we were off the big tower for 3 months, and that gave us plenty of time to have the ground system checked out and everything, and then do the mechanics of putting it back together.
Same location, just
Same
a
location.
guide tower as opposed to
well, it's still self-supporting.
Oh, it is self-supporting. I beg your pardon.
And even stronger than before.
I'm sure. I hope. I can't remember his name now, but I remember the guy that used to come around on the circuit every so often and paint the old tower and climb all that 327, 330 feet to do that. He was well worth his money as far as I was concerned.
I tell you, that those people, they're like broadcasters. They've become addicted to that job.
What was an exciting moment for you in Smithville, Ralph, in radio?
I guess, John, as a result of my job at the radio station in Smithville, I was the general manager at the time. I helped to launch the Smithville Fiddlers Jamboree, and I was the voice of the Jamboree for 25 years. And also, I was the voice of the DeKalb County Fair for 25 years, the oldest fair in the South. And I did tractor pulls and baby contests and you name it. And I recall one summer, Dean Martin had a variety show on NBC, and they needed to have a summer replacement. So a lot of the Grand Ole Opry stars came to the DeKalb County Fairgrounds in Alexandria to do some TV taping. Oh. And I went down there and did a remote broadcast all day long. I interviewed George Jones and Tammy Wynette, Jerry Clower, and he was a hoot. I mean, he had us in stitches just talking to him. But I broadcast all day from the fairgrounds, interviewing George Jones and Tammy Wynette. So that was one of the more memorable things, I think.
Is that Fiddler's Jamboree still going on?
Still is. We conceptualized it in 1971. Mm-hmm. The first event was in 72. We had more performers and square dancers than we did fans. But today, that collectively over the weekend attracts about 100,000 people. And in fact, it was kind of the forerunner of Uncle Dave Macon Days.
I guess so, similar type of event.
Yeah, in fact, Jesse Messick and I were friends, and we talked, and I kind of gave him some names and some things, and now we have Uncle Dave Macon Days.
And it's become a great annual event for this community. Yeah. One of my favorite recollections was a visit of General Douglas MacArthur back home. Yeah. General MacArthur married Jean Marie Faircloth, a lot of folks will not realize that, from Murfreesboro. And when President Truman removed General MacArthur from his Army post, fired him if you will, came back to the country, He made his speech to West Point. He made his speech to Congress. Old soldiers never die. They just fade away. And one of the things he promised to do was bring his wife home, Jean Marie Fairclough. So he brought her home April 30th of 1951, I believe it was. Flew in at Seward Air Base. We had 5 different pickups that day to cover the arrival of General MacArthur here. The publicity was so great about how many people we're going to have in Murfreesboro. I think a lot of people stayed away. We had a tremendous crowd. As a matter of fact, I lived on North Church Street, as I mentioned earlier, but I walked to work that day and didn't drive a car because I felt sure I wouldn't have a place to park. We had a pickup at Smyrna when they arrived. Louis Penuel, the late Louis Penuel, was working for the station. We suspended him over College Street in a guy wire type of arrangement. Broadcast as they came under, went down College, went around the public square, down East Main to the James K. Polk Hotel, which is where SunTrust Bank is located now, freshened up there. They bought borrowed an old Rolls Royce from a friend over in Columbia. Mr. Roy Byrne, B-Y-R-N, was the Cadillac Buick dealer. Borrowed that. Mr. Roy drove the Rolls Royce, came to the Polk Hotel, went in to freshen up, came back out then to go to Horace Jones Field for the public program. Guess what? The rolls wouldn't start. The rolls wouldn't start. So a crowd gathered and pushed that Rolls Royce off and finally got it started and going. And they were going down East Main. Now, sideline to that, Dr. Homer Pitter was principal of Central High School. The MacArthurs had a young son by the name of Arthur that was just about high school age. Dr. Pitter said, what if we could get Arthur to come to his mother's hometown and go to high school? So they had a big sign up over what is now Central Middle School saying, "Hi, Arthur." That Rolls was going so fast when they went by Central High School, they would do well to see the building, never mind the sign. Well, anyway, Arthur didn't come back. On to Horace Jones Field, had quite a program. Jennings Jones was mayor at the time. Doc Earthman, Jack Weatherford's son-in-law, father-in-law, Mary Weatherford's father, was the MC. And they had the program there. Then they went to Stones River Country Club, had a luncheon, and then on back to Seward and back to, I guess, New York, where they lived for a number of years.
And did you interview him?
Did not get to interview. Didn't get that close to the general, but it was quite a day just to be able to see that great American general, to have him right here in Murfreesboro.
There were many times that important things happened in Murfreesboro that you and WGNS were a part of. Did you do anything the day that the Japanese submarine came to town?
That was before my time, even before the time of the radio, I believe, Bart. I've seen the pictures of that Japanese submarine on the square. But we didn't miss many events. Later on, when I was working for the other station, WMTS, we used to have, everybody had a two-way radio in their car where they could transmit back to the station. And we had a public siren at that time that went off in town when there was a fire. So whenever there was a fire anywhere in Murfreesboro, that siren would go off, and folks would tell me, when we heard that siren, we turned to WMTS, we knew there was going to be a report on shortly about that event. That's just how much impact radio made and still makes in this community today.
Things were quite different then, because I remember when I was working here, when I was in college, there was a telephone in the studio, and every time there was a fire call, the phone would ring. And you'd pick it up, and there would be a message. I don't know if it was recorded. I never talked back to it. It would just tell you where they were going. And you would put it out on the air, and this fire report brought to you by, and it was always an insurance company.
And always a good relationship with the radio stations and local governments, too, the city and the county as well.
And still is, too.
Still, oh yes, absolutely.
Who would you say, John, was the most notable person you've ever interviewed for radio?
Probably J.C. Penney. James Cash Penney.
Tell us that story, would you?
J.C. Penney, for many years, was on the north side of the public square in Murfreesboro. They moved over to what was called Penney Plaza, which is where the office building that's a part of Pinnacle Bank is located, across the street from Pinnacle Bank. And there was Penney Square there, and J.C. Penney was the anchor store. Mr. Penney came to Murfreesboro during the construction, and he came during the dedication, came in twice, and had the opportunity of interviewing him both times. I remember they had a nice luncheon for him out at the VA hospital. I don't know what the connection was there, but it was a nice place to go and to have to honor Mr. Penney.
How did you feel emotionally talking to a giant in the free enterprise world? Talking
to a man whose aunt had worked for J.C. Penney for many years, and who had always worn J.C. Penney clothes. It was quite a thrill to literally meet a legend, I think. And talk with him. But that was the opportunity the radio gave all of us. When anybody of any significance came to town, we had a chance to interview them, talk to them, report their visits here. How about your...
I think probably the Grand Ole Opry stars that I alluded to earlier, you know, Tammy Wynette, George Jones, legends, Jeannie C. Riley. In fact, Harper Valley PTA was a #1 song at that time. So I interviewed Jeannie C. Riley and Jerry Clower. It was a little bit intimidating in a way. You know, here these are legends in music, and here I am at a little radio station. But it was fun.
Bart, tell us about some of your folks you've interviewed and talked to.
Many years before I was here, I was at a station that played big band music, and so we brought a lot of big band stars to town, and we did shows with people like Guy Lombardo, got to meet him, talk with him. Lawrence Welk, went to lunch with him before the broadcast. Really a nice guy. I was so impressed with him. And then I worked with Snooky Lanson, and I hope people know who Snooky is. Snooky was the nicest guy around, and if you don't know who Snooky was, back when there was a show on the radio and TV called Your Hit Parade, another guy, Frank Sinatra, you may have heard of him, I don't know. He went on to something else, bigger things, and Snooky came in after him. Snooky was from the Nashville area. What a nice guy. And we did a radio show with him on a regular basis, even went on a cruise with him, sort of hit it up where listeners could come and went on cruise. Just super, all of these people that we got to know were just really nice people.
Snooky also was the singer and the host on the WSM Radio 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon show.
That's right, that's right.
For many
Sunday
years.
Down South.
Sunday Down South, that was it. And Dolores Siegenthaler, John Siegenthaler's wife, was the vocalist on there. Dolores Watson, I bet she was.
That name almost popped out, and then you said Siegenthaler, I thought, maybe my memory.
Married to John Siegenthaler, right, and young John Siegenthaler's mother, doing well in media.
Radio in those early days, and I don't remember this happening, but I always think it's funny to hear about it. The WSM transmitter out in Brentwood has a railroad track that goes through it, right behind the tower. And they would stop everything at a certain time and turn a mic on out there and have the train. It was, which train was it?
I'm trying to remember the name. It was about 5:10 in the afternoon, something like that.
And it would be on time. It's 5:10 and the so-and-so train is coming through. And that was a big deal. 50,000 watt station that covered the southeast,
all over the country.
And they were listening to that train.
It makes me wonder, John. Of course, we're talking about Murfreesboro in particular, but what would any community in Tennessee be without a radio station?
Well, same way with the newspaper. Radio and newspaper are very much a part of the community, I think so, Another event or events that I remember from WGNS early days, when Seward Air Force Base was in its heyday, we had a gentleman who was the public information officer who had worked for one of the major booking agencies in the country before he went into the Air Force. And he had a connection back with a lot of the name bands. He would find an orchestra, Johnny Long, by the way, shanty in old shanty town, that was playing in Chicago, say, on Friday night, and had to be in New Orleans on Sunday night. Well, he would make arrangements to send an Air Force plane to Chicago, pick them up, bring them to Smyrna. If they would play a dance on Saturday night, then they'd fly them on to New Orleans the next day. So he brought in a number of name bands. And we at that time were affiliated with the Liberty Network, remember the Liberty Broadcasting System. So we fed those broadcasts to Liberty and had the opportunity of emceeing those with a number of the major bands that came into Seward Air Base.
There was another person who was very much involved in this station and very well thought of, still remembered by so many, and that's Jerry Brown.
Oh yes, let's mention Pee Wee, right, yes.
And whenever I talk about Jerry Brown, people always say, boots, boots, boots. And he did that Hub Store commercial, and we still play it occasionally, and it brings back memories. Jerry's just a super guy.
I hope he's doing well.
I hope so, and he was with us many years ago when we had a milestone anniversary here, and just as much of a gentleman then as he was back in the early days.
Yeah, the owner of Hub Store was Mr. Saul Arbit, later his son Hal, And we used to do those commercials with Mr. Arbage himself, and I think he enjoyed doing the commercial more, and he didn't worry about whether anybody heard it or not. but they did, and they sold lots of boots at the Hub store.
On our website, we have some old pictures, and one of those is with Eddie Arnold.
Oh boy!
And it was in an unknown record store.
It was his record store.
Well, I got a call a little bit later from Spencer Graves, who was over at Beatty's for many years in the camera shop, and Spencer said, you know, that was the Moffat's record shop. They had a record shop up on the square, and then of course. They were involved with the music store and all of
the
that.
music stuff.
So
well, I think originally Eddie Arnold had
Eddie actually.
It had the name of Eddie Arnold Record Shop. Here,
wow.
On the square.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
So you've
and I think Moffat
mystery.
did later acquire what was that. Yeah, and probably that's when he was there making an appearance.
Where was that on the square? Do you recall?
It was about not where Altman Jewelers was, but right along in there, as I recall, one store back, I believe, from where Altman's was. I forget the name of the store that's there right now. Yeah.
East side of the square.
Yes, east side of the square it would be. That's my recollection.
Well, there's some great memories with this city and tied into this station and so many other things too. Cecil Elrod, back to the name of the station, GNS, Good Neighbor Station. I think that was a stroke of genius of starting that. And when we were fortunate enough to get into the ownership of the station, we brought that slogan back because it said everything.
Oh, yeah, so.
Everything that we try to do is done in a good neighbor manner. And that's important no matter what size the community is.
Yeah, Cecil had been in Armed Forces Radio in World War II down in South America, as I recall. He came home and told Daddy, I want a radio station. So his father, who had Cecil Elrod's French shop, put a radio station on here that we mentioned earlier, starting on the night before January 1st, 47. And the original studios were up on the second floor of what was the French shop. I think the guidance center is located in that building now, and that was where the station was for many years until, I guess, Bill Vogel moved it to where it is now, did he not?
He did, back in 1960.
1960 is where its location, where we are right now.
When it was at the French shop up on the square, it had no windows in the studio.
That's right.
Jeff Jordan was telling me when he was a kid, he heard this DJ on the air talking about the weather and how it was sunny and hot and everything. They went up there, put water all over them, walked in and said, man, the worst storm has just hit this town. And the guy starts talking about how the weather's changed and how the storms are here and it's raining. Of course, that's sort of funny.
Well, one of the great enjoyable interviews I did was with Randy Wood, who was a graduate of MTSU from up in Morrison, Warren County, Tennessee, went over to Gallatin, put in Randy's record shop, and started Dot Records. And at that time, we were playing Western Kentucky in basketball. So the occasion for Randy being there, we had the Hilltoppers, which was a group he recorded, to sing at halftime. So Randy came, we did a lengthy interview on WGNS. Let me see if I can make it. Seymour Spiegelman, Billy Vaughn, Don McGuire, and I can't think of the fourth name.
He's one of the Hilltoppers. Billy Vaughn was one of the Hilltoppers?
Yeah, he was one of the Hilltoppers, and later he became musical director for Dot Records.
And had
with
a
Randy.
lot of hits on
Oh, a
his
lot
own.
of hits, right.
Yeah.
But that was the original four. I'll think of his name when I get out of here, but I used to be able to remember all the names. But
they had so many great artists on Dot Records.
And Pat Boone certainly was one of them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now, Bart, when you met Lawrence Welk, was Randy with him? Because Lawrence recorded with Randy.
The man who was with him was the guy who, Lon Varnell.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Who
he
did all the
promoted him for
booking.
many years. Yeah.
And he was in town, and we were getting ready to do a broadcast, had a dance up at the War Memorial Building, and got the chance to go to lunch with him, and he gave me his card. I still have that card.
Good old champagne music, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and it was the first card I'd ever seen where it was embossed, and his picture was raised on there.
Local radio has been very much a part of the local sports scene over the years, through high school, college sports, and certainly WGNS, as well as your station in Smithville as well. Yeah. And still an integral part of the local sports scene.
People like Monty Hale. Yes. Monty Hale was just phenomenal. He was here when I was here in the 60s. What a gentleman. Monty loved sports. He loved Murfreesboro. And when his son started doing a show here, I said, "You sound just like your dad." And he said, "I feel at home. I can remember playing here on the floor when I was a
Monty
kid."
was working,
But just a great guy. After Monty, we've had people like Jeff Jordan, and Jeff had the same love for youngsters. Chip was here for
Chip Walters.
for many years before he went over to MTSU. Brian Barrett. Brian grew up here and has done and continues to do a phenomenal job in sports.
Let me mention my friend Ray Duffy, who was
That was the beginning, wasn't it?
It was the beginning of sports on radio. Cecil Elrod went to Washington, to the Capitol Radio Institute, I believe it was, and hired a sports announcer, I believe an engineer, and a copywriter, traffic manager, and brought them back. And this guy was from Massachusetts. He had a New England brogue that you wouldn't believe. And everybody said, how will people understand him? Well, they did right away. They understood him because he got to their heart. And he became one of the most loved people we ever had to do with the station. And he, first time I'd ever heard it when a basketball went through that net, he used the term swish. And Ray Duffy became known as Swish. And later became Director of Recreation for the city of Murfreesboro. One of my great pleasures working with Ray Duffy.
What a great, we had him on the air during that 50th anniversary.
Yes, right. I visited his gravesite down in Attleboro, Massachusetts a few years ago and said my final goodbye to him.
Bart, I think it would be appropriate for us to commend you for for perpetuating the legacy of local radio. I mean, you're doing a great job of, while many stations don't adhere to that anymore, you're still preserving that legacy.
Well, it's back to loving what you're doing. And the audience here, the people in this community are so phenomenal. They will share things with you, and from those sharings, you come up with ideas that can make whatever is done better.
And you still have Shop and Swap on, don't you?
Absolutely. 67 years now.
67 years. Used to be Charles L. Bradley Plumbing, Heating, and Electrical sponsoring.
We need to get them back on.
Yeah. I'm afraid they've gone the way of all good folks, but some mighty good people, mighty good part of the community. As we wrap up, a final recollection, memory, thought about radio?
Well, I guess I would be remiss, John, if I didn't mention that in December of 2010, Bart and I were a part of a group, about 25 of us met in Nashville and conceptualized the idea of the Tennessee Radio Hall of Fame. Wonderful. And our mission is what we're talking about today, preserving and perpetuating the importance, the legacy of what radio means to every community from Mountain City to Memphis. And we're still doing that. So I think that's important.
And you have an annual event that honors people, the members that will be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
This will be our third induction ceremony, May the 3rd, at the Embassy Suites Hotel in Murfreesboro.
Bart, final thought from you about radio and keeping it going in this good old community.
I think the thing that will keep radio going, and I think it'll be here from now on out, is just to always be in tune with the times. In the 50s, when TV came along, everybody said, well, radio's dead.
Wrong.
Top 40 was born. Now, when they're saying, what's going to be next, radio is still in there. We're streaming on the internet. You can pick us up on telephones. You can see us electronically with the printed page on the website. And I think as long as you stay in with today's technology and serve the community in which you're licensed, there is a need for local radio.
Well said.
As long as you are the good neighbor.
Well said. All right.
Well said.
As we close out, give us a classic station break.
WJLE, home of the Center Hill Lake radio station, Smithville, Tennessee.
Bart.
Thank you for tuning to your good neighbor station, WGNS.
And this is WGNS 1450 on your dial. This has been Murfreesboro Storytellers with Ralph Vaughn and Bart Walker. Thank you very much for joining us.